Lindsay Hadley, you are on the CEO.com show. First of all, how does that feel? How does it feel to be on this show?
It's so awesome. Thanks, Clint. I feel like a really big deal right now.
No, you're doing me a huge favor for coming on, and those watching or listening are about to experience someone who is up to something in this world that is meaningful, and you're making a huge impact. Why don't we start there with what you're doing, what you do? It's hard actually for me to explain to people what you do other than like change the world. So now we get to go deep on it.
You're so sweet. Thanks for the opportunity and to share. It is unique. The career I've had, essentially the last 15 years, I've been in the social impact sector as a producer and a development director and a consultant. So I've had a little boutique firm and I help people with the good they want to do in the world. So it's a one-stop shop agency called Hadley Impact Consulting. And we do everything from like fundraising, event production, campaigning, strategy, influencer acquisition, creative work, all of it. And recently, like in the last year, I've been shifting out of consulting completely, not taking on new clients, and trying my hand at film production. And so I produced my first film, executive produced a documentary. And now I'm putting together a television show right now in partnership with Angel Studios and the Harmon Brothers, which is super fun. And basically, looking to see what's up next in life. But it's been a great journey. But all of it's had this lens of trying to make a difference, trying to see, how we can make the world better, how we can help worthy causes, social entrepreneurship, social impact investing, all that kind of stuff.
So what does social impact mean to you?
So, it's really broad and a buzzword, statement. But for me, what it really means is like, how is this like actually qualitatively changing the lives of people, whether it's climate change or mental health or poverty or human trafficking or foster kids or whatever it may be. Like, sometimes the solutions are for-profit endeavors and sometimes they're nonprofit endeavors. Sometimes they're partnerships with governments, so oftentimes, we'll play like a trusted node across these different sectors, because you'll find that like private sector and public sector and faith communities often don't speak the same language. And so you need someone bilingual, and we come in and put together these really cool strategic partnerships and opportunities and do that. So yeah, I mean, it's a broad comment, but for example, like I've worked with Coca-Cola in the past around the recycling, but I probably wouldn't just sell the sugar water. You know what I mean? Like, so in other words, if it's making a difference, I'd love to be a part of it. If it's just straight profit making, I haven't historically done that, but, not that there's anything wrong with that. I'm a big fan of the tools of capitalism. It's just that I just have generally chosen kind of some purpose in my work.
Yeah. Tell us about this documentary. That sounds interesting.
Oh my gosh, thanks. Yeah, it's called Uncharitable, and it's coming out at the beginning of the year. We're doing like our first big premiere. And Jake and Maggie Gyllenhaal's dad, Stephen Gyllenhaal, is the director of our film. And then Ed Norton, the actor many people may know, he's featured in the film along with a lot of luminaries from the nonprofit space, whether Scott Harrison from Charity Water or Jason Russell from Invisible Children. We have all these different characters that we interview. And essentially, it's based on a very popular TED Talk by a gentleman named Dan Pallotta called The Way We Think of Charity is Dead Wrong. And it's a documentary that's a 90-minute exploration of his TED Talk. His TED Talk basically goes into describing the demonization of overhead in the nonprofit sector and the social good sector, and how people don't allow the social and nonprofit sector to use the same levers we use in the private sector. Things like paying talent, spending money on marketing and creative work to invest in a community of compassion the way you would a community of consumption, and then taking risk, all these things that entrepreneurs can use for growth and levering value, they can't do. And so we kind of explore how that's an archaic thought and we should rethink it. And we go into some of the most successful nonprofits in the last decade in our society that were totally cannibalized and destroyed by this thinking, and how how we just kind of have a strong case for support that we should maybe start thinking differently about all of it. So I'm excited for it to get out there in the world and for people to change their thoughts.
So how did this all come together? This is like, you just said a lot of things that are like, no one can do anything you just said. How did you do that? How did you get Ed Norton? How did you get the Gyllenhaal dad? How did you like get the charity water guy to come on? Give us the details on like how you put this thing together. This is like, to me, like who you are and what you do. You make things happen that no one else can. Like everything you just said, like you just kind of like nonchalantly just named like these huge names in this incredible project. How did you do that, Lindsay?
You're so kind, Clint. You're giving me way too much credit. What really happened is, and I'm somebody who definitely has a relentless pursuit of trying to make things happen. That I'll give myself credit for, and a lot of grit. But dude, some of it's right place, right time, as it always is. But I will say, it historically, the way that I always try to create value for other people, right? Just like anyone else, the more value you create, you can bring. So if there's something in it for them, in this case, Stephen Gyllenhaal and Dan Plata were already out to make the film. I actually cold called Dan Plata. I got his email from his like website after I saw his TED Talk years ago. And I was like, I think this is amazing. I'd love to help make a film. And he said, funny enough, my friend, Stephen Gyllenhaal, so they were already friends, wants to make a film. And we do need help raising the money. So I came in and raised, I think 95% of the funds, and as executive producer and helped brought that together. And then they had some great connections. We were able to get Ed Norton because he actually is very passionate about this issue and has talked extensively with Dan about it. He started some of the most successful crowdfunding platforms, right? And so he's been rethinking innovation in the space of doing good for a long time. And so he was really excited to have an opportunity to talk. And at the end of the day, it's funny because the CEO of TED Talk actually says in our documentary, I'm paraphrasing, but something to the extent of Dan's TED Talk that the film was really largely based on, he said is the most paradigm shifting talk in the history of TED stages. And so this was just an idea whose time has come. It's really genuinely an important concept. I mean, the analogy I give my students, because I've been a professor at a university and taught social entrepreneurship. And I always say when I'm explaining this, like, imagine I live here in Oahu on the North Shore in Hawaii, and there's a big homeless problem here in Hawaii. And I always say, like, imagine if we did, a charity bake sale, and we had 0% overhead because I donated all of the ingredients and we all volunteered our time. And then we took markers and recycled, cardboard boxes and made signs and went out on the street and sold these baked goods. And we raised $100 for the homeless community here in Hawaii, versus if I put on a big music festival, like stuff I've done in the past, and say it cost $5 million, but it raised $10 million and it was 50% overhead. Which do you think the homeless population would prefer? So if you're looking at how effective something is based on the percentage of overhead, that'll utterly betray you. It may not be the right question at all. And at the core of it, people are trying to avoid exploitation, which is a wonderful thing. You don't want to be like saying I'm helping someone in need and then lining your own pockets and you're not actually having any kind of material good, and you're taking advantage of the generosity of other people. That's what people are afraid of. And that's why they question the overhead. But it actually isn't the right question to ask. The question should be, what's the ROI? How much value? What kind of impact is on the other side of the utility of my donation, right? So if a large percentage goes out, but it grows the pie because marketing and eyeballs and, and strategies that actually grow, like, if you paid someone excellent, in the private sector, we know this, usually 5% of your employees bring 95% of the value. Like that's actually materially true, right? Like bringing the most of the money and most of the revenue. And it's like, so say you get some incredible development director and they cost, twice what you would somebody else. So it's higher percent overhead, but they bring in 10 times the money. Like this is just a no-brainer, right? Like you just need to look at it more from a position of like value creation. And I think a lot of it comes from archaic thinking that is from our Puritan roots that we kind of used to penance for our sin, by doing charity and like our profit-making tendencies that were evil. Like here's our charity side to make up for that. And it's like, why can't people do really well that are doing good, that are solving major social issues like foster care? There's some there's some things that the private sector can solve as a social entrepreneurship endeavor. You can like come up with like recycled, like Cotopaxi, Davis Smith here in Utah, they're in Utah. He's come up with they use recycled materials, and there's a environment, and there's all these like great causes that they're doing. They're selling a product. And sometimes you can come up with those hacks, but when it comes to like dealing with the mental illness of veterans or helping foster kids get into permanent families, like you can't really monetize that stuff. It's a lot more complicated. So you're going to always need government to come in, and government has a certain limit and inefficiency at a certain size. Everyone knows that. And so the nonprofit sector is always going to be a solution to solve this. And if we can let them use the same tools that we know work in business, we'll see so much more value to society. So that's kind of the whole argument. But yeah, I guess in answer to your question, how did I do this? Well, I didn't do this. It was a group of us, so we pulled it together. But, I definitely have just learned, like most entrepreneurs, you just got to ask, and you probably get a bunch of no's, but it's worth trying, right? So it's been an honor to be a part of it.
You mentioned foster care and how maybe the private sector could help solve that problem. What were you thinking there? That was interesting.
Well, yeah, I know you and I've talked a lot about the foster care program. I think that in foster care right now, it's further upstream to so many other societal ills that we struggle with when we abandon kids that need permanent loving families. So 90% of all human trafficking victims come out of institutional care, foster care, and or orphanages around the world. 25% of all foster kids, when they turn 18 and age out of the system, if they're not in a family, will end up homeless on the day they age out. So 76% of all prison inmates have spent time in the foster care system. So if you're looking at like mental illness, homelessness, crime, sexual exploitation, human trafficking, like all of this is further, and generational poverty is all further upstream to getting kids into permanent families. So right now, the Annie Casey Foundation estimates that it's over $300,000 per child that ages out. So not while you're in the system, like when you turn 18 and you age out, taxpayers' liability is around $300,000 each kid. So they turn 18 and their chances of being on welfare, in prison, having some incident with the police that we're paying for is around $300,000 on average per kid. So if we can, there are amazing organizations that, for $1,000 or a little more over than that, a couple $1,000 can get a kid into a family through really strategic marketing and clever ideas like making videos of the kid where it shows their personality and their the high functioning Asperger's they have, and that they love ponies and they have pigtails, and they humanize this little person and then show it into faith communities, which are 3 times more likely to adopt. We're seeing these kids that had a 0.2% chance of adoption, having 50% of them adopted in 6 months and all of them adopted in 2 years. Like, just incredible results, right? So for a few $1,000s now, you can avoid hundreds of thousands of dollars of taxpayer. Imagine if like businesses would help lend their marketing teams, to film those kids and help distribute it and promote it and feature it, or giving foster families that choose the incredible generosity to like take these kids in. What if you could give your business gives like foster family discounts, right? Like half off, or, whatever for your family to come eat here or do a movie, or like, this would be incredible. If we wrapped around the families that wrapped around these kids, that'd be an amazing thing. So there's all kinds of things we can do, but I think more than anything, just let's let people try to solve these problems using business thinking and tools and strategies that we know work. Like, hire the best people to solve this, pay them very well, because not everybody is willing to like sacrifice all, of their income when they're super talented. They'll rather just go make a lot of money in the private sector and then sit on the board and like oversee the chump who decided to go in a nonprofit who's making nothing all year. You know what I mean? And I'm saying that because it's been me. I'm talking to myself. I spent my whole career, even though, I was bringing in tens of millions of dollars for the charities and clients, and I was making never more than $75,000 a year. And that was like, and I was getting paid 20% more than the next person in the nonprofit. You know what I mean? It's crazy.
Right.
So it's like in the private sector, you'd have some commensurate value, equity. You'd have, there's nothing like this. You can't take a charity public. You can't access public funds, but e-commerces can. It's just crazy,
Yeah, for sure.
So,
it is an interesting dilemma to solve. And you mentioned a company, Cotopaxi, that does this. I think they were the first Utah company to be registered as a benefit corporation. And that
Yeah.
became like a thing for a while, right? And I would say like social entrepreneurship kind of became a thing. I think it started with maybe like Tom's Shoes, where you buy a shoe and you get another one is given for free to someone who needs it. And then Warby Parker with the glasses had the same model. How do you know who's real and who isn't? How do you know like who's using social entrepreneurship as a way to brand and market themselves, and who's genuinely committed to the cause that their business is based around?
That is such a great question, Clint. I think that the same way you can look at brands, they're essentially just people, right? Brands behind a brand are people running it. And you can just look. I think the greatest way to gain the trust of others is just to be trustworthy, right? So the greatest way to be like legitimately about the cause is to just be about the cause, and people can see. Like, for example, that one-for-one model you talked about, which has been criticized, and rightfully so. There's some dysfunctional things about it, right? Like I know Tom's Shoes, which I'm a big fan of them. They've had some troubles in like actually, and the criticism is really warranted, of putting so many free shoes in some developing countries. They've disrupted local markets. So people who are like a local guy living in poverty who's selling shoes, just now an influx of free shoes came into the market, and then, you put that guy out of a job, right? So they've been trying to look at.
Oh, that's interesting. I didn't even know that. That's fascinating.
Yeah, they had some negative consequences. There is sometimes where helping hurts, and it's a very humbling experience. I've been a part of those endeavors where you're like, oh my gosh, we thought we were trying to do a good thing. And, like, for example, speaking of vulnerable children, like, this is a little bit of a tangent, but over $3 billion a year from the Christian community, from the West, from the United States, is going into like orphanages around the world. And we found that 80% of all orphans living in orphanages actually have living parents. The majority of them are being placed there because if we build it, they will come. Parents living in abject poverty place their children there like a boarding school solution where they can get fed and educated in 3 meals a day, and they're like, okay, I'm relinquishing my child because it's a better lifestyle than the poverty I can offer them. But the academics of the titular heads of academia have like done the research, and it's unequivocally just not the case. The kids would be better staying home with mom and dad and having no education, 1 meal a day. Like the effects are devastating to be abandoned in institutional care. And so here we are as Christians, like, and the West just funding what we thought was helping little kids. And it's actually creating a family separation crisis, right? So to kind of go back to your question, how do you know which ones are good? It's just like any person. Like, how do you know someone's trustworthy? How do you know? You have to build a relationship, and you have to take some of that risk. You can obviously look up online and do due diligence, like anything else. Like, right? If you're going to swipe left on some Tinder app, like you can like find, Google and check out, oh, they've been in prison, or gosh, they have, whatever. But genuinely, like, you have to take some level of risk in relationship with some of these organizations. But I think you can find out a lot and just see how holistic. Is it just like a marketing stint where they're like, and we give 10% back, and it just feels like an afterthought? Or is it like, so for example, Sackcloth and Ashes is a company that, full disclosure, I'm an investor in, so I'm, totally biased. And so take this with a grain of salt. But one of the reasons why I am an investor is because of who Bob Dalton is. So Bob is the founder. It's a one-for-one model. For every blanket you buy, a second blanket is donated to a homeless person in your zip code. And if you look at Bob's story, you ask the story, like, what is the why they got involved? And that'll tell you a lot. So his mom became homeless when she fell on hard times after her mother and her brother died. She turned to alcohol for comfort, then, got into a bad relationship with addiction, and then ended up being homeless, sleeping on beaches and benches, as Bob says. And he was the kid who would drive, he's from Portland, Oregon, and he would drive by the homeless community, which is so pervasive there, and whisper under his breath, get a job. And now his own mother, who's the hardest working woman he knew, who always had 2 jobs, single mom, is now homeless. And it was very humbling for him. And so he started this company because he actually called, like, his origin story is that he called the local homeless shelter and was like, what can I do to help? And they said, we need blankets. And he tried to he tried to start making blankets, realized he wasn't a very good seamstress, and then came up with this business model to like address this need for blankets. So if you look at their holistically, like Bob, all of the materials are recycled. They So, they hire refugees for the seamstresses and homeless population. They have, recyclable packaging. Everything about like it's like holistically, the whole thing is just somebody who cares about the world. And then you look at how Bob lives and, how radically and recklessly generous he is with others and what he's done to help. I think you just find out more about the identity behind all of it, and you'll find a lot how sincere it is, And I think in general, I think most people are sincere. Most people want to. Some people want to make money and do good. There's nothing wrong with that. Like, you can make money with a good marketing identity because you're generous, and people then choose your product as a result. Like Davis has made this great brand where people know this is the core of who he is. It's like, great, then he makes more money, he can help more people. Like, I'm pretty unabashful about it. I'm just not as jaded, but I think that I get why society is reticent and concerned, I think that more that we can like bridge the gap between like capitalism, which kind of beat out socialism, which was this tension we had for some time of like, right, and capitalism won in our society. But it's gone really far. And I think social impact, this whole motif is trying to pull it in a way that's like, hey, it's not just about profits. It's also about people and the planet and sustainability. And we have responsibilities to each other as an ecosystem. And you know what I mean? I think.
No, I think that makes sense. And it's easy to see like why people start these types of companies, particularly really good people. Right.
Yeah.
Because they, hey, it's really cool to make money, but I also would like to do something and make a difference. It makes a lot of sense. I wonder, like, examples like you mentioned, like this Tom Shoes thing got me thinking, like, when these types of companies maybe do make a mistake or do something unintentionally that has negative consequences, how I imagine it's really hard to get that reputation back, even harder than for like a company, like an oil company, right? If they screw up, they're like, oops, we're still going to do oil, right? Like, what do you want from us? But when like a Tom Shoes, and I'm not singling them out because I actually know nothing about kind of what you said, but like a company like this, how do they overcome when they make a mistake, when they make unintentionally have a negative effect in the world, when their whole mission and core of their company is the opposite?
Oh, that's such a fair question. In my experience, it is a lot harder because the trust equity has to be higher. Like, if you're like going out with like, hey, I'm the do-gooder, then when people are like, oh, really? There's hypocrisy here or whatever. I found, like, in the case of Tom Shoes, they were pretty public and blatant about like, yeah, we've learned a lot. And, just taking ownership of like,
yeah,
we had this good intention and we're learning along the way. And I think it is hard. I think it's about communication. I think some people are going to always tear down people. They're going to always assume the worst in people. You can't always control what the tide of the public thinks. But I think in managing through PR and managing communicate is important, just in saying, look, this is the truth and this has been our journey. I recently gave a TEDx talk called The Shocking Truth About Orphans. And I go into some of this, where helping is hurt in the institutional care of kids, and some of these myths around the idea about orphans and foster kids, things that we don't know. For example, one of the myths I discuss is like, most people think you have to get on a plane and go to like a third world country to interact with orphans. And yet we have 420,000 kids in foster care at any given time in the United States. And 100,000 of those, about a quarter of them, are awarded custody of the state they live in. Their parental rights have been terminated. And so they're literally our orphans. We don't call them that. We call them children experiencing foster care. But like, that's a giant myth that like, we just don't have orphans in America. It's like, yeah, we do. They're foster kids. And so many churches and people are like, I care about orphans. And then they like get on a plane where they do like a short-term visit, and they don't become a relied upon person in that kid's life. And even though they meant so well and they took selfies and photos and they loved on the kids and played with them, which I've done, by the way, I've totally been guilty of this, you don't realize that you're actually creating radical attachment disorder, because these kids are super used to abandonment, because again, 80% of them have parents that abandoned them. And then you're just popping in and out, and they actually have a hard time psychologically bonding and connecting to people because of this ripping the Band-Aid off over and over. And so, the more we learn, it's like, gosh, I did that. I used to go volunteer in Kenya and hold little orphan babies. No one's holding them. They're just sitting in a crib, like rotting away. Like I just came to love on them. And I didn't know. It's like, shoot, there are better ways. Maybe instead of donating to sponsor the kid in orphanage, pay for a social worker who will help them find a permanent family, or fund a family before they ever get separated in the first place. And like, there's a bunch of organizations now that are repurposing orphanages and turning them into community centers where you can like have vocational education or like childcare so that these kids can be with their parents at the end of the day. And, just it's really like a new paradigm. But I think what I want to say is I found somebody's like, I just learned that what I was doing wasn't the best. And I pivoted, like, gosh, where's the grace in someone's intentions? And we didn't know what we didn't know until we learned, right? I don't know.
Yeah.
I think,
yeah. That's the thing is like, we're all going to fail.
Yeah.
We're all going to make mistakes. We're all going to unintentionally have negative consequences. It's probably just more about how you handle it, how you think about it, and how you position it. It's kind of interesting. There's I don't know if they're a nonprofit or what they are, this Operation Underground Railroad. Tim Ballard, you probably know him.
I've met him. Yeah.
And I think I've met him as well. I've actually interviewed him. I don't know him that well, but I've talked to him in the past, and he gets a lot of flack for kind of what you just mentioned, but in a whole different, realm or kind of a different topic around this idea of child sex trafficking and exploitation. And he sets up these like sting operations. Like what they do is incredible. It's wild. It's like out of a movie, right? I think they're actually making a movie about it. But he gets like criticized for it as well. And I just wonder like how you handle the criticism, I think says a lot about you, right?
Yeah. Yeah. That's a really good point. And this is the thing, every donor and every consumer, there is some onus of responsibility where they have to check, like, they have to do due diligence, like, Google and look into what's being, like, what are the accusations? What is going on in that individual, their life, their, or like, and where there's smoke, there's fire. Like if it's a consistent, negative review, or people have bad experiences and there's just like wholesale, if it's a pattern, right, then you got to be leery. So all that stuff is super hard, but it's really tough when because there are bad actors. There are people in the nonprofit space that are not worthy of stewards of your money, and they may be wasting it, squandering it, giant egos that are driving it, dishonest, nefarious. Like there's all kinds of stuff out there. And so, tragically, those people who do that are such a dissent and take away from the trust equity the public has for those who really are earnest and doing it good. Right. And then people conflate like good intentions with malicious intentions. And gosh, like this is a really fair question. I think at the end of the day, relationship is everything, right? If you actually know the people, and you can, and or even a big NGO, you can build relationship with someone inside of that ecosystem and like really start to understand what they're doing and what they're about. And so, like whatever organization is, whatever you hear about them, you can research it, look into it and ask good questions. Then every NGO has its requirement by the IRS to actually publicly produce what's called their 990s, which is like their tax statements to show exactly how they're spending their money and what they're doing it. The big thing you want to be careful of is don't just automatically think, oh, it's a huge overhead, that means it's a bad organization. That's not necessarily true. It depends, right? So you could have someone not getting paid at all or getting paid pennies, and they're entirely ineffective human being, right? Just because someone's not being paid well doesn't mean they're good at their job. In fact, usually it's the inverse. Like if you're really good at your job, you actually probably are creating enough value to pay yourself well. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So like low overhead doesn't mean that someone's effective. And I'd rather pay somebody better and then have huge results. Because at the end of the day, what is it we're trying to solve problems here? You know what I mean? So that's all the stuff you got to look into. But yeah, there's some people who enmesh their funds, embezzle money, or fraudulent. It's tragic. And, we all have to just kind of like wade through that sewer as we try to make the world better. It's tough. for sure.
Yeah, it's interesting. Like, you see like a nonprofit executive maybe making a lot of money, but then we're like, we should pay teachers more. We should pay all these,
Yeah.
people. And like, yeah, like if we want the very best talent, we should pay them more. That's not the issue.
Agreed. Agreed. Yeah.
How do you decide what you're going to work on?
Mine has
and
been
who you're going to work with?
Yeah. Well, mine has been mostly through, again, relationship, right? Like I really care about who more than the what, because there's so many worthy things to be involved in. I have more and more gravitated towards the vulnerable children piece because it is so further upstream to so many issues that I care about. I care about all those things mentioned: homelessness, poverty, mental health, crime. Like I care about all that. Sexual exploitation. And when I realized wow, this is, I don't know. I feel like you learn a lot from a society, how they treat, those dependent on them. We literally are orphans, in our own backyard, these foster kids and children around the world, refugee issues, people that are just by the absolute, luck of God, where you're not in that situation right now, or you are. Interestingly, with the Ukraine, war recently and the exodus of all these refugees, a friend of mine, Jason Stout, we worked together in helping refugees years ago in a couple different nonprofit endeavors. And now he's married to a Ukrainian woman, living in Ukraine, is now a refugee himself. So isn't that interesting? Here's this man who's helping people his whole life, helping refugees around the world. And now he's finding himself in that position. And
wow.
You just never know when it could be you that needs help. It could be you that, is in that situation. I think, it's so fascinating because particularly there was an article online where there was a horrible tragedy where a little toddler was eaten by a crocodile at Disney World in Florida a few years ago. I don't know if you remember this. It was horrible. There was a little kid that was eaten by a alligator in Florida. And I was looking at the comments, through the article, and people were just blaming these parents and I would never let that happen to my kid. I'd be watching my kid. What are they doing? It was a Disney World, a public area. Why would anyone think there would be life-threatening animals, dangerous animals, wild animals that could eat your kid? So anyway, long story short, I couldn't believe the amount of negative comments. And I started researching, what is it? And it's often happens, someone gets in a crack and someone dies, or someone breaks in your home, fire, whatever, refugees, and people, they actually blame the victim. And there's this human nature to be well, I would never let myself be in that position, or, and they've realized in psychology, it's a way to make people feel less afraid, because being vulnerable is such a scary idea. And so by demonizing the victim, and objectifying the victim in some way, you can distance yourself from that threat ever being a possibility for you. I would never be that foolish. I would never be a parent that could do that. And it's kind of a terrible human phenomenon for sure.
Tell us when your documentary gets released.
So it's going to be out in February. I think the first week in February, we're having a premiere, and then we're going to be trying to get it out through distribution. So we're in that effort right now, figuring out how you can watch it. And I'll be sure to share that. But you could go to hadleyimpact.com to learn more, or follow me on social media, Lindsay S. Hadley. I'll probably promote it there. But thanks for asking. I'm just so grateful to connect with you, Clint. Are you guys doing a lot with Silicon Slopes right now? You guys have done a lot of charitable things over the years through education and other things.
Yeah, we do. We do stuff like that at Silicon Slopes. We get the criticism, we make the mistakes. So some of that was even for myself, I'm hey, how do you navigate these things when you maybe don't live up to people's... Yeah. We feed a million families every year at Silicon Slope Summit.
Wow.
We do the packaging of the meals and stuff, and it's a pretty big effort between us and the food bank and the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. That's really cool. And various things like that. But Silicon Slopes is a nonprofit, right? And so the only way I try to run that thing is don't die. Right. I don't want the organization to die, and let's try to do as much good as possible and just see what happens. But who knows if that's the right way to do it.
I didn't realize it was a nonprofit. You just taught me something.
Yeah,
I did
yeah,
not
yeah.
know.
It's a nonprofit. It can't lose money, but it also like, it doesn't matter if it makes a ton of money either, right?
Yeah. Yeah. So where is your main source of revenue from your conference every year?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the event kind of funds the org. Yeah,
Sponsorships. Yeah. That's really
yeah.
cool. I mean, what you've done is amazing and it's paid off. Like the community and the ecosystem that you've been nurturing and harboring for our tech entrepreneurs and just entrepreneurship in general, and it's just really impressive. And I'm super grateful for all you've done. It's really, I hope people feel like you're entitled to any kind of success that comes from all the value created in the community.
Oh, well, you're very kind. And seriously, I love working with you. We've worked with each other in the past. I hope we work with each other in the future. I'm looking forward to watching this documentary when it comes out. Lindsay, thank you so much for coming on the show. What an honor.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate you.